Hey, what's up, guys? I'm Fred Warner, linebacker for the San Francisco 49ers. Abercrombie has the new suits you need, plus all the collared shirts to go with them. The Abercrombie & Fitch Collins suit is the only suit you'll ever need for any occasion. Available in slim, classic, and athletic. Pair with a collared classic. Go with a soft, easy-to-wear sweater polo or a comfortable long-sleeve shirt. With so many different fits and fabrics, you can make a look that's completely your own. Add the Abercrombie & Fitch Collins suit and new collared shirts to every occasion this season. Shop online or in store.
Every cup of Nespresso coffee is an invitation to transform your morning routine into a ritual you can treasure each and every day. Using the Virtuo Pup, a simple touch of the button freshly brews bold aromas and a rich, velvety crema layer for delicious cafe-quality coffee at home. Whether you enjoy your coffee hot or over ice, every sip, every morning is unforgettable. Nothing tastes like Nespresso coffee. Visit Nespresso.com or our app to explore our full range of easy-to-use machines and coffees not found anywhere else.
Hey guys, Derek here. I just wanted to let you all know that unfortunately when I was recording this time, I had a few unforeseen audio issues that I didn't notice until editing, and while I did my best to make it as pristine as possible, there are still a few points throughout the recording when things sound a little bit janky or bits are missing, just for a second or two. So I do apologize profusely, but I really hope that you still enjoy this episode because I still think that the discussion is really great and 99% of it still sounds great. So if you hear a bit or two when I drop out or when things are a little bit messed up, that's why. I'm sorry, but please enjoy our discussion here of the Pagemaster. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Underrated Movie Podcast. This is a podcast where we discuss, I was about to say books, films, underrated, underappreciated, and have been under the radar and passed most people by. I am your host, Derek McDuff, and joining me today is Matthew, aka My Stash of Books. How's it going, man?
It's going great. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm looking forward to talking to a childhood favorite of mine.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this one, and the reason I almost said books is because we're going to be talking a very literate movie, so it's appropriate that I had. Would you say you're a book talker? Is that how I would refer?
That's the technical term of it, because I mostly post memes and stuff, but I'll do book reviews. So book talker as well.
Yeah, exactly. So excited to have somebody who knows a thing or two about books, and full disclosure, everybody out there, we work together in our day jobs in a bookstore. So, this is rather appropriate that we're going to be talking about the Pagemaster. Before we get into that, I mentioned, you're a book talker, you do book reviews. What do you want to let the people know about you and what you talk about?
I am just all about reading books, finding out what area of the hero's journey your main character is on, and deciding about where the villains kind of fall inside of that. Just overall finding good stories that are written very new. I love reading new authors, and I also love reading the classics. And I read a lot of fantasy and sci-fi, so I feel like I'm qualified to talk about this best film that I've ever seen in my childhood.
Yes, because I will say to people that you have, I would say not every day, but maybe a good amount of days that worked with. I was like, so when you're gonna have me on the Talk the Page? And I was like, you know what? I think it's about time. He's been asking long enough. Let's do this. Let's cover it. And yes. So I was like, I've gotta have him on and talk about the Pagemaster, which I actually we're talking about a little bit before the show. I had this in common with your wife. Who I'm probably going to have also on at some point, but yes. I had never seen this movie before. And you had been telling me to watch it for so long and to cover it. Why was this your diehard underrated pick, Matthew?
Because this book, see, I'm getting confused myself. But the movie itself is just I love the name of your podcast being Underrated. And I feel like this is the perfect example of an underrated film that has a great message for kids that isn't layered in a way where you kind of have to search out the meaning. It is very much straightforward. hey kids, it's okay to be afraid sometimes, but we're here to show you that even reading a book can bring you courage in your life. And I love that message, especially being a kid. I was the younger brother, so I was always kind of looking up to my older brother and kind of afraid to do the things that he did. And this movie specifically kind of helped me start learning, like, oh, I feel like I can become a braver person by reading, because knowledge is power. And I don't care what anybody says, if that's cheesy, it's true.
Yeah, and this movie, you're always a little bit wary when you go back and watch a childhood classic from somebody, and I will say, I hate ragging on movies, but there's certain movies that people like of our generation are like, you've got to watch this, and you didn't watch it, and you're like, what the fuck was that? So I was a little bit nervous going in to watch this a couple nights ago, but man, this movie, I was won over immediately.
Isn't it amazing?
Fucking great.
Yes.
Because like I was actually the older brother,
Okay.
but I was always reading as a kid. I love books, the power of the written word. I'm a writer myself. I love literature, and
Yes.
that is something that really comes across in this movie, is how important and how great reading really is. I
Yes.
thought that was amazing and really well done. And the movie, it feels like a very specific subgenre of a subgenre that existed in like the mid 80s to mid 90s, because this comes out in
Yeah.
94, right?
Yes. Yeah, 94.
And out to, I should say, this is a movie starring, somebody who was on top of the world at the time, Macaulay Culkin, along with Christopher Lloyd, Whoopi Goldberg, Patrick Stewart, Leonard Nimoy, the GOAT of voice acting, Frank Welker, and then Ed Begley Jr. is in the live action parts, and directed by Maurice Hunt, who did the animation parts, and somebody who has come up multiple times on this podcast, maybe the most underrated director, Joe Johnston. But yeah, this movie just... It's that specific subgenre of kind of kids' adventure movies, but also kids' adventure movies about a kid. Usually it's a kid. It's not always a kid, but getting sucked into this other world, And I
Yeah.
think of, some other ones like Tron or like Last Action Hero, where you get sucked in, you see all the tropes. This one is so unique because, it's about books rather than like a video game.
Yeah.
Each of them kind of touches on their own medium, and this one, because it goes from live action to animation, it's such a cool transition. And I love that he's like, I'm a cartoon, and they go, no, you're animated. I love
Yes.
that distinction. That was really cool, and it references all these classic pieces of literature. Like, who else are you gonna get to play Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? Like Leonard Nimoy.
Yes.
Like
Oh my
that's
God.
so spot on, right?
Yes, and it just a perfect example of like them finding these character actors and having them use the power of their voice. And this is why voice acting is such like I know that it's become more popular now, and I feel like people appreciate them more now. But like when growing up, you didn't know who was voicing these characters. You were just a kid enjoying a film. And then now that I'm older, it's like going back and being like, holy crap, Patrick Stewart can throw his voice like this, and you just get to see everyone. And someone that you didn't mention that's in this film, and God rest their soul, is Phil Hartman, who I am a huge fan of. I love news radio growing up. He plays the skinny pirate, and he kind of talks like, and it's so perfect to kind of see how many like A-list actors are inside of here that can act just as well using their voices as they can in front of the screen.
Yeah, and I really appreciate this movie. It does have those list actors, Patrick Stewart and these people with like these great voices, and that was something that was becoming more prevalent in the 90s, and it's kind of taken over today, where you get like A-listers to be the voices of your animated movies. And obviously Aladdin comes out the same year. That really propels that forward with Robin Williams. But it still has like something which I unfortunately think has gone away, which is you get these classic voice actors, Like I mentioned Frank Welker, who is, I call him the GOAT of voice acting because he really is. People might know him as like Optimus Prime, but but he's been in like everything and anything,
Yeah.
And then you also have like Jim Cummings. Who, he was probably most famous as Winnie the Pooh, but in watching this, hearing him do Long John Silver, you're like, oh, that's Pete. That's Pete from like Goofy.
Yes.
a lot of these guys who have been around in terms of voice acting appear in this while also being like, okay, but we're gonna have Whoopi and Patrick Stewart, and so it's a really nice melding of both worlds. I thought appropriately enough because you have somebody sucked into another world.
Yes, and it's now that you bring up Whoopi Goldberg as well, it is really great to see the chemistry that her and Patrick Stewart have in this film, just because one plays adventure and the other one plays fantasy. And there's always this kind of like, does he have a crush on her? Do they end up together? Do they not? But it's a very silly, fun kid way of like introducing like this is what love is, this is like how your mom and dad talk to each other. So they kind of sneak these little like little drops into this movie, and I feel like it works so well between the characters.
Yeah, and this is, and I've said this about other things, but I love a movie that doesn't overstay its welcome, because the runtime of this thing is 75 minutes. This is like an episode of Severance. You're like, I was like,
it's crazy.
Sometimes when I'm like, I have to like watch these movies for the podcast, not watching them, but if I'm like, okay, all right, I've devoted day Brutalist the other day, not for a podcast or anything, but I saw the Brutalist. I was like, well, that was my whole first half of my day, was watching the Brutalist. That thing's 4 fucking hours.
Yes.
I was like, I could watch this movie 4 times in the runtime that I watched the Brutalist.
I would have more fun watching this than I would the Brutalist.
That's fair. So the brevity is very nice. It just gets in, it gets out. It doesn't overstay its welcome. I don't know if you want to speak to the underratedness of this at all, because I think, this is a movie that it doesn't get really remembered as one of these like classics of the 90s, like some other kids movies are. Even the ones that have been like shit on them, that have been, a lot of them have been reclaimed by our generation, because like Hook or whatever, like, oh yeah, I loved that when I was a kid. This movie did not do well at the box office, and has kind of been like,
not at all.
It's been not reclaimed, not forgotten.
It was a huge flop. It was like a flop before it was like, oh, this is what a flopped animated movie looks like. Because you always kind of expect these, like back in the day, like we were saying, it's like, oh, well, this has such an A-list cast, this has great animation, what could have possibly gone wrong? And it was just, I feel like if this movie came out now, it would have such a huger, wider acceptance of an audience, because as time has gone on, I feel like the American culture has centered around reading again, and I love that. And I just wish that people knew about this movie more than they do, but it's great because whether you're a bookseller or just someone who has recently picked up reading, if you've read the classics, there's so many just little jokes and nods to classic literature and newer things that you can't find anywhere else. You're not going to find another movie that's based off a book that's animated that is going to teach an important lesson to kids. You just can't find it.
It does feel really unique, and like, not only did this do bad at the box office, it did pretty poorly critically.
Yeah, people crapped all over it.
It only has like 21 listed reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, which is a pretty small sample size, but even then it has like a 19%, which is abysmal. Roger Ebert shit all over this thing. Culkin got nominated for a Razzie, which, by the way, fuck the Razzies. I hate them more than anything. So like, it's just like, it was one of those movies that like people just like hated it at the time. And like I said, it's not been completely reclaimed, but I logged it on Letterboxd like I do with anything I watch, and it's like hovering a little bit over. It's like a 3.2. So I think that people like grew up like, this is a good movie, but maybe like not a great movie, but I really enjoyed it. And maybe that's just because I am such a big reader, but I really thought this thing was profound. So like, what did you think of, like, because you talked about how this got all these messages and themes for like classic literature and new literature and stuff like that. What did you think of this movie as like a gateway, as a way to talk about the written word?
I feel like it opens up the opportunity for people to, like, one of the books that my wife, for example, hasn't read is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So for her to be able to go back and like, oh, I don't understand this reference, but it's so popular in pop culture with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde that you see enough references to it. But this specific one is the one that made her go, oh, I want to read this. It's just so fun because laughter and the way that this movie is animated, again, it kind of just invokes this childlike wonder inside you no matter what age you're at, like, viewing it. And I think that one of the reasons why it just probably didn't do as well during that time is when it first released, was one that it went through development hell and production hell, so I'm guessing that has something to do with it. But it also, one thing I just have to really go off a quick tangent of, did you know that this one has a video game?
I did not know that. Please
Yeah,
tell me about it.
There was a video game for it as well. And you could tell that they thought this movie was going to blow up so big that they're like, oh, we have to have a video game for it. And the video game is like honestly fun. It almost reminds me of like those old point and click adventure games. And they did this a lot with like, not I would say like all animated movies back in the day, but like if you've ever played the Lion King video game, or Aladdin, like the old one for the SNES.
That shit was hard.
Stuff was great, right?
Yeah.
Super fun. And they did the same thing with here. And it feels like they wanted it to be bigger than it actually was. But I don't know if it's because the industry themselves didn't like it, or if kids were just way more focused about being outside and playing rather than, reading. Because when you look at it from a bigger point of view, Richie Tyler is the main character, doesn't end up with like more friends. His friends are books by the end of it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like this kid goes from being like a scared loser to just a loser.
That's a pretty good point. Yeah, because at the end he has this moment where the movie he wraps up. He gets out of the library. He's back to the real world. He gets his books and he's riding his bike home, and he sees this like ramp that's like over a construction thing, and it's like whatever.
In the rain.
And it's like that. It's like, oh, that's where his like bullies were bullying him, and it doesn't like show up where like they're there. And oh, you're never gonna like. He's just there alone, so he's not like impressing anybody.
Yeah,
but in a weird way, I kind of like that. It's hey, you don't need to read to anybody or to like do anything else. Like books are their own world. You can like go into them and live your life and go into your treehouse and read. And so I thought that was all pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of tell even just from the opening monologue from Christopher Lloyd, who does a fantastic job as both the wizard and the librarian. He presents stories like the adventure, fantasy, and horror in such a way that you're like it makes you fall in love with not only book reading but as booksellers. It really got me hyped to like go back into work and be like, I can't wait to talk about the favorite books that I've just been recently reading. And it's really cool that a film from 1994 can evoke that emotion in me.
Yeah. So I was a big reader as a kid. I still am, not as much as I was. I was like glued to books. Was it a chicken and the egg thing? Was it like, did you love this movie because you were a reader, or did you become more of a reader because of this movie?
Well, I was born in 93, so I was, this was not on my radar until I was at least like maybe 5, 6, or 7. I can't remember exactly when I first watched it because it was already out. We had the VHS tape for it, I'm sure. But I feel like it inspired me to read more because I grew up in the mountains, and a lot of what you do up there is like, oh, you're outside, you have to shovel snow, or you're going to go play with your friends and have a snowball fight. Or if it's the summertime, you're going to ride your bikes around or go to the lake, do something out there. And this kind of showed me where it's, hey, those times that it is like you're snowed in, it's not just all video games and TV. Like you can really fall in love with a world that is just some random person's imagination, and you just happen to be lucky enough to pick up their art and enjoy it for the first time. And it's really cool just to see that they were inspiring kids to try to do that more.
Yeah, definitely. I really like that, and I really like that. I love whenever a film, so obviously, one kind of medium, books are another kind of medium. I love when one kind of medium is like, hey, we're gonna like really examine this other medium, the language of this other medium, using own different mediums language. Last week I talked about Tick Tick Boom, and I talked about how that is a movie it's a film, but it's really looking at the language of musical theater. And this feels like, obviously, it's a film. It's the tropes and all of the things that you would use in any film, but to examine the way that we read, examine the way that books work, which are fundamentally so different than. Yet this movie does such a good job at breaking that down and being like, okay, cool. After you go home, see this movie or whatever, go and crack open a book, look at it, and it's not like saying like, oh, well, this one book is good or this one genre is good. It's like, no, there's all. Read a horror one or a fantasy or an adventure, even they even make reference to nonfiction at some point. So, and there's all these like little books in the side. You see these things that are like these walls that are like made of books, and they're like, yes, and it's so freaking cool. There was one moment I was like, why the fuck is Atlas Shrugged in this movie? But other than that, I was like,
God. It was so the fact that he's carrying it on his back and trying to lift it up, I was like, what a clever use of imagination and animation, and being like, oh, you know what, this is for anyone who has read an even higher level of literature, because Atlas Shrugged is not something that just anyone has read before.
Yeah. So what did you think of the way that they used the language of film to talk about the language of books?
It's not like it is like a one for one, kind of like how you were saying, because like obviously the language of books and the language of film are different. But the fact that, and this is going to sound a little ridiculous, but at the most troubling times in like Richie Tyler's life and journey, whether he's outside of it or inside the animation part of the film, the number one thing that he keeps hearing is just look to the books. And you're kind of wondering, like, why does it just, as a kid, obviously, like, because you're an adult, you're going to understand this, but, kind of as a kid, you're just kind of hearing this phrase over and over again is look to the books, look to the books, look to the books. And any time that the character's scared, if he needs something in life, if he is being impatient and needs just to sit around and wait and kind of like be himself, or, do something that is counter to what he loves and what he wants to accomplish, the number one thing he always has to do is, again, open up a new book and kind of learn something new about himself. And ultimately, his main problem in the movie, obviously, is that he doesn't have the courage to do things. But through him reading and him going on this little adventure and kind of getting lost in his own world and telling his own story, you kind of can see how just that simple phrase of look to the books does it kind of carries that message. I when I hear that phrase now, like the look to the books, or if I'm messing with someone at work, and I'm sure I'm going to say this to you from now on, it's like that can invoke like, oh, I remember that from the Pagemaster, and then you start thinking about that book and the messages that kind of come with it. It's all really fun and kind of oddly connected, but finding those connections inside the book or the book, I keep messing up, the movie, and then like kind of taking that into real life and into the books that I'm reading currently, it's fun.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think that what it really does is show you just kind of the magic of books. Like with film, it's not as much as left up to the imagination. Whereas books, they're like these magical things where you just go in, and the way that you imagine a character in a book might be different than I do. Even though the description, the words are all there on the page, it'll tell you everyone has their own imaginations. They're going to picture something differently. They're going to have their own distinct experiences where we watch the same movie, And I think this does a good job of kind of capturing the world of, in this movie it's literal, but in like figuratively sucked into these fantastical worlds and going on these adventures and feeling like you're a part of this big world that so many people lived with. And film is still a relatively new medium. I think all of classic books they go into, every one of them is older than the medium of film itself. So these are not just like flash in the pan things. These are like things that have stood the test of time. And many of them have been adapted for films, which speaks to the kind of the mediums playing with each other, which they always have and they always will. But I think that the magic of books and also the magic of just the library is so cool. I kept thinking, I've compared it a couple times, but I kept thinking of Last Action Hero, about how he goes in the movie and he's got that ticket, the ticket that, they rip, and then he gets sucked up or whatever into the, and he meets Ian McKellen. And this one, it's like, instead of the ticket, he's got his library card, and how magic.
Yes.
and that becomes a whole thing. And then they're like, oh, the library card, and how this library card is like literally a passport to other worlds and other dimensions that just can
Yes.
open up your imagination. And the way that this movie is like, no, go to the library, because I love the library. I always have. It's
Yeah.
such an amazing place to protect libraries, especially with everything that's been happening within the country recently. We really need to protect things like
Yes.
that. And I go to the library multiple times a week. It's my favorite whenever I need to write, which I frequently do for my other jobs. I will go to the library. I will try to spend as many hours as I can there, just getting my writing done. And it's so important that we have a place like that. What did you think of like the way that this portrayed libraries?
It really opened it up to a library is for kids. And
Hmm.
although that the people who are in charge of this building that withholds all this knowledge, they can still remember what it's like to have that childlike wonder and give you these, like, librarians, because they do a very thankless job. But for a librarian to go out of their way, or bookseller, whoever, someone that has dealt with books, and make a recommendation to you because they know that you were going to learn something from that book and unlock a part of your imagination, like you were talking about, that previously you weren't even aware that you had. It's so cool to me to like see how well represented libraries are, because one, it's kind of funny though, because the lights are turned off at the beginning when he first goes in there, so you don't really think about libraries where the librarian's like, oh, you came in, let me go ahead and flip on the lights for you so that way you know which
Yeah.
direction's which inside this place. But obviously that's just like a little nod to some filmmaking and some, you know, cinematography things. But overall, a kid going into a library can stumble upon something that'll make him freak out because I've never read anything like this before. And some of those books that are inside of this movie are now banned books. So it's very interesting to see those titles in there as well, to think like, oh, well, it was just back in 1994 where we thought these books would be appropriate for kids, because there's nothing inside of the movie that's super inappropriate, I'd say, even though they do make that nod to Stephen King and Salem's Lot. But it's still funny to see that how quickly things can change around. So, you know, seeing banned books and like how libraries are really struggling against this. Yeah, I mean, heck, even our own local library is fighting right now because they are trying to privatize the library. And I can't even imagine how many more books are just going to become on this banned book list. And you are limiting not just a child's, but anyone, like a grown adult. I have one of my best friends has just now started reading, and it's great to watch him have such a great time with it. And when you think about someone or an organization being able to take that away from someone, it breaks my heart, because it's like you are putting a message out there to future generations and to this one that's saying the way that you turned out and the way that you are imagination, the way that you are creative is wrong. And that to me just, it pisses me off. And that's why I think that we all need to be way more appreciative of our libraries, and more specifically our librarians who have to put up with all this craziness.
Hard to agree. Your librarians, your booksellers, these people who are working these jobs with books and putting books in people's hands, everyone, but especially young people, reading books is so valuable. I still try to read as much as I can, and whether it be something like a just the reading for my own pleasure, or something where like I talk about a lot how one of the big things that I do on this podcast is I read as many books on film as I can, because I was an English major. I was not a film
Yeah,
major, and I want to
right.
know. I want, when I'm talking about movies, when I'm doing my film criticism, whether it be written or it's on this podcast, I want to know what the fuck I'm talking about. So I will read books like In the Blink of an Eye. You know, I don't know anything about cinematography, but Walter Murch wrote a book. You bet your ass I'm going to read about him. You
Right.
know that I'm going to read William Goldman's book about screenwriting, because these things on like they can open up other worlds, but they can also just give you so much information about the
Yes.
world, and I
Hmm.
really appreciate that.
Yes. Just going, thinking about, I took a theater lighting class back in college, and
Mm.
just finding out the history of how lighting worked for the stage, and how, you know, the first forms of entertainment when we were just even gathered around a fire, how important lighting is. And you kind of follow that trail all the way back down, and you're like, oh, cool. Well, you you see how important light is when you're just reading a book. It's like if you're in the darkness, you can't possibly read a book, but you just shine a little bit of light and you can make out a few of those words and keep reading those paragraphs and understand the story. And it kind of just grows into something that is bigger than you. And film specifically too is just something that is so great that we can kind of go back and watch these movies that have inspired us throughout our lives. And to think that some people wanted to take that right away is absolutely bonkers to me.
Yeah, it's fucking insane. We live in an insane fucking time, you know, and there's just a lot of people who want to ban books and take away knowledge and all this shit, and it's a shame. And that's why I think, you know, movies like this are really incredibly important. And that's what, you know, I'm really glad, you know, you made me watch this one, because I had a blast watching it. I was like, this shit is
and I knew you would.
Great. Yeah, you know me
I
too
knew
well.
You would. And that's the funny thing, because it's like you could give this to any bookseller and tell them to watch this, and they're not gonna be able to help themselves without all the little puns that are inside the movie that are just about the physical book, not even like what the stories that they hop into are, though. You know, one that comes to mind is when adventure and fantasy kiss for the first time, and it's really funny, and Horror's there, you know, giggling himself up, and it then zooms out outside the cave, and he asks her, do you want to cuddle up with a good book? And of course she punches him across the face. But like, it's just so cleverly written that you have to appreciate like what this film really is. And that is a comedy that is going to teach a kid about how to be courageous even when no one's watching.
Yeah, I think that is incredibly well put. You know, like I said, a lot of great inside jokes, a lot of good puns for people who love books. You know, I love they keep saying like, oh, you don't have to spy, you know, like that kind of shit. I thought that was great. What is of the three genres that they talk about, which one is your favorite? What do you go to?
Like I said, I'm one they would consider a fantasy expert. I put quotes around that because there's a lot of golden age or olden fantasy books that I just haven't, you know, picked up because I've been reading a lot of new.
Well, we were talking about Once in Future King. You saw me reading that. We would talk shit about that.
You know, it's funny because it's like I love that book, but it's just so old. But like, if I probably didn't read all 5 books that make up the Once in Future King, I would probably enjoy it more. But it's cool that you even mentioned that, because it feels like they're trying to animate someone like Richie Tyler that's in the movie, or Macaulay Culkin, to be like a young King Arthur. You know, it's almost like when he goes and he puts on that armor and he picks up the sword at the end, you know, he's picking it up off of a skeleton from a vanquished foe that's tried to do what he's done in the past. And it's just fun to see that those little parallels are, and like basically what I'm saying is that we're using our imagination as well, as I am projecting the Once in Future King on this film that does not mention that once, you know?
Right, because like they're, you know, it's pretty like doing the horror. They're like, oh, this is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and then eventually they get to like, you know, Treasure Island. But then it's fantasy. It's like, this is just a dragon, and you're like, oh, is this like Lord of the Rings? Like what dragon is this? And it's like, it could be whatever you want, you know, like this armor. And I love that like moment when he like grabs the armor, the skeleton just crumbles the fuck away. You're like, oh shit, this skeleton's been here for a minute. And it's quick tangent. I love the animation in this movie. Like, it was done by Hanna-Barbera. So like, and it was just made me like really miss this kind of like classic style of animation. This like everything is kind of now everything is computer animated, which I like computer animated movies, but you don't really see this classic animation.
There's a certain charm, to this type.
Yeah, and it's like kind of dark, it's kind of that like it's obviously not a Disney movie, because like the Disney movies, especially the period, they have a different look. This is almost Bluth, which, by the way, speaking of Don Bluth, I don't know if you noticed this. There's like sounds from Land Before Time in this. I was like, that's fucking Sharptooth. That sound right there. Like, did you notice that too?
Yeah, it was great seeing that.
Yeah. So I thought that was really cool. But yeah, just I loved the animation in this. Do you want to speak to that at all?
Yeah, because I was even going to say, like, because Frank Welker in this, and same thing with Jim Cummings, it kind of looks like that same animation style that you had for Winnie the Pooh. You know, you can kind of see how it's just a more improved version of it, and it's really fun to see how something that uses that same color palette, I would say, and kind of like these rough character shapes and sizes to kind of fit into the mold of, well, how do we make this for kids, or how do we make this for that older kid that's not this 4 or 5-year-old goo goo gaga baby bullshit anymore, but it's
Right.
like that needs to really look at himself hard in the mirror and be like, I'm a coward, I need to change for the better. And the animation style, I think, works perfectly here. The only criticism that I have for this, but this was still pretty damn good for 1994, is in the beginning when the painting up on the top stops dripping down on Richie.
Yeah,
And
that is a little
how
like
he's, running
early
away.
90s CG. Yeah, you're like, oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. It is. It's just so different, and I wasn't expecting to kind of have that kind of negative reaction to this film at all. But when my wife was chuckling just about how bad it looked, I was like, okay, you know what? That's the only thing I'm gonna let you get away with here, and calling this a bad movie. So if that was enough for everyone else to leave negative reviews, I don't know what to tell you. But the only other thing, the fun fact that I found out about preparing for this too,
Mm.
is, and this is definitely a tangent from talking about the animation, but David Kirshner.
The last thing you want to hear when you need your auto insurance most is a robot with countless irrelevant menu options. Which is why with USAA Auto Insurance, you'll get great service that is easy and reliable, all at the touch of a button. Get a quote today. Restrictions apply.
Since you're new to H&R Block, we'll look at your returns from the last 3 years for any money your last guy might have missed for free.
I could get money back from last year?
You could. We'll find any mistakes.
Could have really used that 2 years ago when I dated that mistake for 5 months.
Don't leave money on the table. Switch to H&R Block and get a free second look review. Second look is included at no additional cost with the purchase of tax preparation. Results vary. All tax situations are different. Fees apply if you have us file an amended return.
When I looked up just the cast for this movie, it's so funny because all of his kids are some of the neighborhood bullies in the very beginning of the movie.
That's funny. Yeah, David Kirshner, who, by the way, screenwriter for this movie, and I will also say, because I talked about Don Bluth earlier, also wrote a couple Don Bluth movies, including one I've covered early on in this podcast, Titan AE, so shout out to him. But yeah, any other thoughts before we wrap up here on The Pagemaster?
Nothing too much. I will say that it is very weird thinking that is Ed Begley Jr. rewatching the movie, because I could have distinctly thought it was the same dude from The Princess Bride that played the dad, or the dad from
Peter
Liar
Falk?
Liar. Yeah.
Oh, Carrie
So
Ellis?
yes, and so I thought it was like a combination of these two, but it's funny, going back and watching it now as an adult, and you're like, oh, of course this is Ed Begley Jr., so
Yeah.
that was just like a fun little thing that I had, because I told my wife, I'm like, oh yeah, and the guy from Liar Liar, yeah, he's the dad. It's like, we watched it, and she's like, that's not the same dude. I'm like, oh yeah, probably not.
But by the way, he is the main character in The Princess Bride. Yes. There is a connection there. But yeah, man. So this was a lot of fun. I'm really glad you brought it to my attention. My last question before we wrap up then is, if you were to get sucked into a book, what book would you like to be sucked into?
Oh, without even a shadow of a doubt. I know there's a lot of people that you can ask this question to, because it's one of my favorite questions to ask people that I ask, what are you reading? To customers, to coworkers, to best friends that are picking up reading. What's been your favorite book so far? And it's funny to watch people struggle with this, but I have not even a hesitation to say that it would be the Faithful and the Fallen series by John Gwynne. The best fantasy series that I have ever read, that kind of evokes this same emotion about courage, because the two things that the main faction in this fantasy novel talk about is truth and courage, and they're teaching it to all their warriors, because they always want you to know your truth, to tell your truth, speak your truth, hear your truth out in others, and have the courage to face the consequences of living true to yourself and true to what you believe in. And that world is, not to mention all the cool, crazy shit that goes on inside those stories. I think it's 7 books long, and they're all fantastic. But that world that he set up, he has such a great way with words that you will feel like you are sucked into this, they call it the Banished Lands, and you'll know how everything looks, because you are opening yourself up to having that imagination that we mentioned earlier, and experiencing an adventure of young kids going through an insane time, but the established world will just absolutely blow your mind.
That's really cool. You know, I was thinking about this a little myself, and I was like, I was like, man, like, because I feel like a lot of my favorite books want to live there, you know, like I don't like Lord of the Rings is awesome, magical and stuff, and it might be cool to live in the Shire, but like I wouldn't want to just be a peasant in Rohan or something, you know?
Yeah. I scooped the shit of the horses.
You're just living in medieval times at that point. Or like
Yeah.
a big one for me was Animorphs, but I was like, I don't want to live in a world where a worm could go and control me, you know? Like maybe if I got to be a wizard, I could live in Harry Potter. Like fuck J.K. Rowling, but like still, that would be a cool fantasy world to live in. But I like that you had a little bit of a deeper cut than my basic ass. But like that's really cool.
I think that's why I got hired by our boss, because when we have to go and you interview at Barnes & Noble, is that they will tell you, oh, go pick out your favorite book and we're going to talk about it. And I remember going on like almost the same rant, like word for word, because I kind of, not that I have it memorized, but it's just that I've said it so many times. and it doesn't really change because that's how strong the messaging of the book is. But I remember even just seeing the look on our boss's face, and it was like, you actually care about books. It's not just, oh, I feel like I could sell things and anyone can sell something, but you are someone who loves reading, and tip my hat to her for realizing that in me. So
no, like definitely good on her, and good on you for picking that one. And then I think I was asked a similar question, and I'm like, I don't know that I would want to be sucked into like the Great Gatsby or Winesburg, Ohio, just these like dreary like 1920s like Midwest towns. I don't know about that. Like that doesn't sound as fun. Like yours sounds a lot more fun. But yeah, man, this was a blast. Thank you again for coming on and making me watch this movie. Yeah, fun. Of course, this is a blast. One more time, if you want to let people know where to find you and your book reviews and stuff.
Sure thing. Yeah, I mostly post on TikTok. It's My Stash of Books. All one word as you put your handle in there. I'm going to eventually start a YouTube channel under the same name. I'm going to be posting videos there pretty soon. So take a look and give me a follow.
Yeah, some stuff. And then anybody out there who's listening who would maybe like to check out some other stuff that I've done as well. But I do a couple other podcasts, including Infinity Stones and Dragon Bones, where I talk about the Marvel Cinematic Universe whenever they release a new film. So I just reviewed Brave New World recently, which I had a really good time discussing. That movie might not have been my favorite Marvel movie, but it was really fun to talk about. I also do every other Monday when the episodes of this don't come out, I do another show where I just co-host it called the Midnight Film Society. And then I also have a Patreon where you can sign up for as little as $1 a month. Bonus podcasts that you get. I am now going through 3D and watching them in 2D and seeing how they hold up. Just discussed Silent Hill Revelation 3D, which was a lot of fun with my buddy JMO. Next up, I'm going to be talking about Avatar and see how that holds up in 2D. So having a really good time there. Or if you just want to give the show 5 stars, if you not able to, you don't want to give anything financially, just giving the show a rating on however you listen to this, whether it be Spotify, Apple. If you're gonna give us a like, if you listen on YouTube, it means the world for independent shows like this. But yeah, one more time, Matthew, thank you for coming on, and
Thank you.
And I hope everyone out there gets caught up not just in the world of film, but in the world of reading.
Yes. See you guys.